The judge mocked a mechanic covered in grease. But when he began to speak, no one stayed seated. The courtroom was packed on that muggy morning. Footsteps echoed on the marble floor, blending with the rustle of suits and folders. João Henrique walked in slowly, cap in hand and eyes lowered, like someone apologizing for existing. Oil-stained pants. Rough hands. A tired face. Nothing about him seemed to belong in that place of polished voices and expensive perfume. The guard looked him up and down before pointing to the hearing room. João thanked him with a shy nod and crossed the corridor. Inside, his heart pounded like it might burst. He'd never set foot in a court before. He didn't know what to expect, only that he had to be there. When he opened the door, the noise died for an instant. People stared as if an intruder had wandered in. A young man in a suit whispered to another, "Came straight from the shop, huh?" Soft laughter spread like a stifled sneeze. João pretended not to hear. The judge lifted his eyes over his glasses and measured him, slowly. There was something amused in the tight smile. "Mr. João Henrique, did you not think to change before coming to a hearing?" he asked, adjusting his robe. João drew a breath. "I came straight from work, Your Honor. If I'd gone home, I would have missed the time." The murmur returned, this time with a sneer. The judge leaned back. "I see. Dedication, is it? I hope you show the same attention to your obligations." He only nodded. He didn't know what to say. While the judge spoke, João studied the room's details: stacks of case files, a fan turning lazily, a framed portrait on the wall. Everything felt far away, belonging to another world. His head throbbed. The last few weeks had been a storm. The accident at the shop, the firing, the labor case he barely understood. The public defender had said it was simple, just tell the truth. But no one warned him that truth, spoken by someone with grease on his hands, sounded different. He remembered his daughter asking the night before if he'd be back at work soon. "I will, little one. Daddy just needs to explain a few things to a few people." She smiled, believing him. João held that memory like a charm in his pocket. Across the room, the judge flipped through papers with impatience. "Let's begin. You claim you were dismissed without cause, but the employer says you abandoned your job. What do you have to say to that?" João swallowed. He wanted the words to come easy, but they came heavy, thick with shame. "I didn't abandon anything, sir. I got sick. I had an infection from a cut on my hand. I showed the doctor's note, but my boss didn't believe me." The judge raised his eyebrows. "Do you have proof?" João pulled a crumpled envelope from his pocket. The paper was smudged with grease along the edges. "It's all that's left." The clinic doctor signed it, but the stamp smeared. The judge looked at the paper and let out a short, almost impatient sigh. "This is barely legible, Mr. João." Someone in the gallery stifled a laugh. Heat shot to João's face. He wanted to disappear. For a moment, the narrator notices the silence between sentences. A silence heavier than any verdict. João thinks of his mother saying dignity isn't measured by clothes, and how easy it is to forget that when the whole world seems to see only the dirt. He closes his eyes and breathes. Inside him, an old longing to be heard begins to rise, something he didn't know still lived there. Standing before people who didn't know him, he realizes he didn't come only for a lost job. He came because he needed to prove to himself that he still had a voice. And in that instant, before he even opens his mouth, destiny begins to shift. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked again at the mechanic. His tone had turned colder, more controlled, as if he decided the verdict before hearing the rest. You know that forging documents is a crime, don't you? The word crime sliced the air like a stone thrown without warning. João's chest tightened. He didn't know if the judge was accusing him or merely testing him, but either way, it hurt. I didn't forge anything, Your Honor. I just did what I could. The judge crossed his arms and leaned back. And what you could do was bring me a filthy paper, no stamp, and expect me to believe it? The murmurs swelled among the crowd. João's lawyer, thin, worn out, flipped through folders, hunting for something, anything he could use. But there was so little. No legible stamp, no clear signature, no voice willing to stand for him. Across the aisle, the company's representative wore a discreet smile, the kind of smile that belongs to someone who already knows he'll win. Navy suit. Quiet whispers to another attorney. Shared glances of complicity. João noticed and felt his throat close. It all seemed arranged. He was just an actor in a story with a fixed ending. The judge tapped the gavel lightly. Quiet, please. We'll hear the employer's testimony. A heavy-set man stood, adjusting an expensive watch. He spoke with almost theatrical confidence. Your Honor, this man was a good mechanic, but he started missing work, leaving jobs half-finished, making excuses. When he realized he wouldn't be paid anymore, he invented this illness story. João wanted to interrupt, to say it wasn't true, that he'd worked with a fever, that he'd fainted at the shop. But his voice wouldn't come. It was as if the air had turned to iron in his chest. The judge watched him with a look that mixed fatigue and judgment. Do you wish to respond, Mr. João? He breathed deep. Yes, sir. I worked there 10 years. I never missed a day without warning. But that month, I sliced my hand on a truck axle. The wound got infected. The doctor told me to stop or I might lose my hand. The judge held his gaze, expressionless. And do you have proof? João raised his right hand and showed the scar running across his palm. The room went silent for a heartbeat, but then someone coughed, someone else laughed, and the chill returned. A scar is not a document, Mr. João, said the judge, turning back to the company's lawyer. The representative smiled and nodded, already victorious. João's lawyer tried to argue, but the judge cut him off. I've understood enough. Inside, João felt the weight of ridicule. The sensation of being too small in a world far too big. He remembered his father's words, the worst pain is not being heard. And there, in that hall, he felt exactly that. The judge asked a few more bureaucratic questions, skimmed a few pages, and let fall a dry sentence. The court will consider the employer's testimony and assess the claimant's conduct. You may sit down. But João remained standing. The judge frowned. Did you hear me? You may sit. João shook his head slowly. Your Honor, with respect, if I sit now, I give up on myself. The room stirred. The judge looked surprised. Come again? I know I don't speak fancy and I don't understand the law. but I worked sunup to sundown. I never stole from anyone. I only asked for what was fair. If you want to call me a liar, do it. But at least let me explain." The judge watched in silence, and for the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. João went on. "Do you know what it's like to come home with aching hands and see your daughter ask for bread? To tell her tomorrow will be different, and tomorrow never changes? I didn't come here for money. I came because my little girl thinks the world is fair, and I don't want her growing up believing her father is a liar." A ripple moved through the gallery. The company's lawyer cleared his throat, uneasy. The judge tried to hide his reaction by straightening his papers, but João's voice now filled the entire room. "I don't want pity. I want to be heard. I want someone to say honesty is still worth it." Silence settled. And for the first time, no one laughed. The judge lowered his gaze, took a breath, and said, "Go on." João swallowed his tears. The weight of shame was turning into courage. Suddenly, that cold place felt a little more human. He didn't know it, but people in the front rows were now watching him with something else, not mockery, but respect. And it was only the beginning. The silence hanging in the courtroom seemed to last longer than time. A broken fan droned in the distance, a pen clicked. The judge watched João with a mix of surprise and discomfort. Maybe he hadn't expected that man covered in grease to have such a steady voice. Maybe, for the first time, he was hearing more than words, hearing raw truth, spoken without polish. João drew a breath. His hands trembled, but his voice stayed clear. "Your Honor, if I had another chance, I'd do it all again. I didn't come here to ask for a favor. I just want someone to see that behind these dirty clothes, there's a man." A murmur ran through the benches. A woman in the gallery dabbed a tear. An intern who'd been snickering now stared at the floor, ashamed. Even the company's lawyer, so sure of himself, seemed to lose his air for a second. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Very well, you'll have your time. But remember, we deal in facts here, not emotions." João nodded. "Fact is, I gave my life to that job. Fact is, I got sick there. Fact is, when I needed help, they threw me out like a worn-out part." The company's attorney stood to object. "Objection, Your Honor. This is pure theatrics. We're here to discuss a contract, not feelings." The judge raised a hand for silence. "Let him speak. I want to hear it through." His voice was no longer cold. It carried a new weight, almost human. João continued. "I could have lied. I could have faked a better doctor's note. But I don't know how to lie. Maybe that's why I'm here, because truth scares people who live by appearances." The words echoed. A court clerk, who'd been typing mechanically, stopped. She looked up and, for a brief moment, smiled. Then the back door opened. A gray-haired woman rushed in, out of breath, clutching a blue folder. The guard tried to stop her, but she lifted a paper and said loudly, "I have something the court needs to see." Everyone turned. The judge frowned. "Who are you?" "My name is Ana Paula. I'm a nurse at the Central Clinic. This man," she pointed to João, "was my patient 3 months ago. I treated the infection in his hand. I have the original report, with a clear stamp." The room erupted in murmurs. The company's attorney turned pale. The judge extended his hand. The woman approached and gave him the document. He examined it for long seconds, in absolute silence. "The stamp is clear, indeed," said the judge, with a tone that bordered on regret. "Ma'am, why didn't you come sooner?" "I didn't know he was being accused. I only found out when a friend sent me a newspaper story about the case." João lowered his head. Tears finally slipped past his guard. "Thank you, Ms. Anna." The nurse placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't thank me, Mr. João. You helped me first, remember? When my car broke down on the highway, you stopped and changed my tire. You said, no one should leave another stranded on the road. Today it's my turn to return it." That memory struck like lightning in everyone's chest. The judge braced his hands on the bench and took a long breath. "Very well," he said, looking over the papers. "Considering this new document, the court recognizes the validity of his medical leave." A hush of approval swept the room. But João didn't smile. He just exhaled. "Your Honor, with permission, one thing is still missing." "What would that be?" "Respect." The simple, direct words stopped time. The judge stared, unsure how to answer. "I'm not talking only about me, sir," João went on. "I'm talking about every worker treated like they're invisible. Every woman who scrubs this floor and no one notices. Every father who comes home dirty and hears he smells like grease. We keep the world turning, but the world forgets to look back at us." The company's lawyer shifted, restless. "This is a courtroom, not a rally." But this time the judge didn't stop him. "On the contrary. Continue, Mr. João." The mechanic's voice grew firmer. "When I walked in here, I expected humiliation. And I got it. But now I see the greater humiliation is giving up on yourself. I don't want pity. I want to leave with my head high, knowing my daughter will grow up believing right still wins." A timid clap came from the back. Then another. In seconds, the entire gallery was applauding. The judge looked around, unsure what to do. "Order!" he tried to say, but his voice dissolved into the chorus. Emotion was stronger than any rule. The nurse cried. The weary public defender smiled, proud. Even the guard at the door discreetly wiped his eyes. The judge struck the gavel, but the sound felt different, almost solemn. "The court will recess for 10 minutes. He rose slowly and walked to the back wall. There, he leaned, alone, staring at the floor. His aide approached. "Everything all right, sir?" "I've judged people for 20 years, the judge said, voice hoarse. "But I think today, for the first time, I actually heard one." Across the room, João sat on a wooden bench. The weight on his back felt lighter. The nurse brought him a cup of water. He looked around. The same room that had suffocated him now seemed different. People smiled, trading glances of kinship, as if they'd learned something that didn't fit in the case files. The company's lawyer gathered his papers in silence and slipped out without a word. João watched the motion. A sunbeam cut through the high window and fell on the judge's desk, lighting the dust suspended in the air. For a moment, it seemed even time had stopped to listen. The judge returned, calmer, and asked everyone to take their seats. "Mr. João, the hearing will resume. The nurse will remain as a witness." He nodded. But before continuing, the judge did something unexpected. He removed his robe and folded it over the bench. Today I want to listen as a man, not as an authority. The room stirred. João stared, confused. Your Honor. Call me Enrique, said the judge. Sometimes you have to lay down the weight of office to remember what it is to be human. João smiled for the first time. And in that simple gesture, an invisible bridge rose between two worlds, the world of power and the world of simplicity, finally touching. When the judge said to call him Enrique, something shifted in the room. The air felt lighter, though the weight of emotion still hovered. João looked at the man with the folded robe on the table and wondered what lived behind that serious face. Enrique watched him too, as if trying to decode an old riddle. There was curiosity and, somewhere beneath, regret. João adjusted himself on the bench. His body still trembled. It was strange to see a judge step down to speak as an equal. But something told him this was the first time he was treated with humanity inside a court. Enrique drew a long breath before speaking. I want to understand your story better. Tell me from the beginning. How did you end up here? João hesitated, glanced around at the attentive faces, and began. He said he started as an apprentice at 17, learning by changing oil and sweeping floors. He spoke about nights spent over truck engines, burned hands, and the pride of seeing a car back on the road because of him. He shared that he dreamed of opening his own shop, but life twisted, an ailing father, a little girl, bills that never balanced. The words came slowly, but full of truth. I always thought work would be enough. That if I did my part, the world would do its own. The judge listened in silence. Each sentence seemed to echo inside him. As João spoke, old memories surfaced. The sound of a shop. The smell of gasoline. The face of a man in a blue coverall he'd once seen as a boy. Enrique closed his eyes for a second. It couldn't be a coincidence. You said you worked at Mr. Augusto's garage, on the old highway? He asked, a tremor in his voice. João nodded. I did. He was my first boss. The judge looked down and murmured, more to himself than to others. My father used to fix the car there. I went with him every Saturday. The room held its breath. João looked puzzled. Your father, was he the gentleman with the green beetle? Enrique's head snapped up, surprised. Yes. How do you know? João smiled. Because I'm the one who swapped the engine on that beetle when it was about to blow. Your father was so happy he handed me 20 extra raise and said, one day, my son will be a judge. I never forgot it. Enrique brought a hand to his face, moved. The gallery watched, caught in a moment that braided past to present. I remember that day, the judge said. My father spoke about the mechanic who saved our car and seemed to have a heart bigger than his hands. He said the world would be better with more men like him. And to think you were that man. João lowered his head. Life turns, Dr. Enrique. Sometimes we fix an engine and don't realize we're fixing something larger. Enrique nodded, unable to hide his emotion. You have no idea what this means. The nurse, still seated as witness, wiped tears. Even the public defender swallowed hard. The courtroom, once full of cynicism and haste, felt like a quiet chapel. Enrique straightened. Mr. João, you taught me more today than years of law school. I always believed justice lived in the codes. Maybe it lives in the hands of those who don't give up. João looked at him and answered softly. Justice lives wherever compassion still does. The judge closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words settle. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler. You're right. And my father passed some years ago. At his wake, someone asked what he valued most. I said, honesty. Today I see he was right about everything. João breathed deep, holding back the swell. Your father was a good man. He believed in people. And you keep proving he wasn't wrong. Henrique rose and walked slowly toward João. The distance between them felt symbolic, like the gap between classes being crossed, step by step. He stopped, extended his hand, and said, "Thank you for reminding me what it means to be just." João gripped it firmly. It was the first time those two hands, one stained with grease, the other used to fine pens, met as equals. The gallery stood. Applause traveled up the tall walls, reverberating like a quiet hymn to dignity. Henrique waited for the noise to fade and returned to the bench. The hearing is concluded. This court recognizes the medical leave and orders full severance payment, plus moral damages. Above all, it recognizes the worth of an honest man. João closed his eyes. For a moment, he couldn't believe it. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was the return of his dignity. The judge took his leave with a small nod. I hope life smiles on you more from here on, Mr. João. He answered, smiling with humility. It already is, sir. People began to file out. The courtroom that had been a stage for humiliation became a temple of hope. The nurse approached. Mr. João, are you going back to a shop? I don't think so. I think I'll open my own. And what will you call it? João thought a moment and answered simply. Hands of Faith Auto Shop. Henrique heard and smiled. If you open it, tell me. I want to be the first customer. João laughed. You got a car? I do. A green Beetle. They laughed together. As the lights dimmed and the clatter of stacking chairs echoed, the narrator describes what words don't say. That day was not only about justice. It was about humanity. About remembering that, at some point, all of us are the grease-stained mechanic trying to be heard. Outside, the sun was already setting. João walked along the sidewalk, warm wind on his face. He stopped before an old shop with peeling paint. He smiled. He stepped in, ran a hand along the rusted workbench, and breathed in the oil that never left his memory. It was the same smell as the beginning, but now it carried new meaning. He grabbed a piece of cardboard, wrote a name in thick pen, and hung it on the door. Hands of Faith Auto Shop, we fix what time broke. As he looked at the improvised sign, a voice came from behind. Judge Henrique, in a simple jacket, no robe. I said I'd be your first customer. João laughed. What did you bring me to fix? Henrique thought for a second and answered. The engine, maybe not. But the heart, I think so. They looked at each other and smiled. And in that instant, the world felt a little more just. The late afternoon sun streamed through the courtroom's high window, casting a golden beam across the marble floor. People had already left, but João sat for a few minutes in silence. Something inside him refused words. It was as if the weight of years had melted all at once, leaving a light emptiness, nearly sacred. The nurse hugged him discreetly and went on her way. The public defender shook his hand and said only, "Thank you for reminding me why I chose this job." João smiled, shy, unsure what to say. Judge Henrique stood, taking in the now empty room. The echo of applause still seemed to linger on the walls. Henrique approached slowly. "Do you have a few minutes? I'd like to talk before you go." João nodded. He was tired, but something in the judge's expression made him stay. Henrique sat on the edge of the bench and folded his hands. "Today, you spoke louder than any ruling I've ever written. What you said about respect, about dignity, that's going to stay with me a long time." João lowered his gaze. "I just said what was stuck in my throat, sir. Sometimes that's exactly what the world needs. Someone to say what's stuck." He paused, thinking. "You know, João, when I was a boy, I thought justice was a building, a robe, a code. But true justice is what you showed today, looking at someone and recognizing the human being standing there." João smiled, simple. "Justice that comes from the heart lasts." Henrique nodded. "Would you say a few words to the court staff? I think they all need to hear what you have to say." João hesitated. "I don't know how to talk to a crowd, sir. You spoke today, and the whole court listened. Now you'll just repeat it to the rest." João drew a breath. The judge opened the side door and called the employees still in the building. Guards, interns, clerks, even the cleaning staff. About 20 faces gathered, curious. Henrique asked for quiet and looked at João. "The floor is yours." He stood, looked at those people, and felt his legs shake. But when he began, his voice was clean, full of truth. "I'm not a man for speeches. I learned to fix engines, not to speak pretty. But today I learned that sometimes what fixes the world isn't what we do with our hands, it's what we do with our hearts." The room went still. All eyes on him. I've seen big folks laugh at simple folks. Bosses laugh at tired workers. Customers laugh at janitors. Even sons laugh at their own fathers. Seems the world forgot how to respect those who do the hard work. But it's their sweat that holds everything up. He looked down, gathering words like gathering memories. "When I walked in here today, I thought this was a place where only the powerful have a voice. But I found out that even a man covered in grease can be heard if he speaks with an open heart." A woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. The guard who'd eyed him with suspicion now watched with admiration. "I'm not better than anyone. I've made mistakes. I've lost faith. I've cried myself to sleep thinking the world had forgotten me. But today I learned God forgets no one, even when the world turns its back." His voice faltered, not from weakness, pure emotion. "Life is like an engine, Judge Henrique. If we stop lubricating with love, it rusts. And when it rusts, it starts to rattle, starts to break inside." The judge smiled. "Go on. I believe we can still fix the world. One act of kindness at a time. One good word. One opportunity. When you give someone a chance, you're giving more than work. You're giving back faith." Respectful silence filled the room. Even the always rushed interns seemed to forget the clock. João paused, looked at the judge, and continued. I dreamed for a long time of having a shop. Today I see God gave me a different shop. Each person I help is a part one repair. Each weary soul is a motor that turns again. He breathed in. We don't have to be judges to do justice. We just have to stop closing our eyes to another's pain. A murmur of approval rolled through the group. The eldest clerk, gray-haired, began to clap. Soon, everyone joined in. The applause was gentle, sincere. Henrique looked at this simple man and saw more wisdom than in all the law books on his shelves. You've just given the best speech I've ever heard in this courthouse, the judge said, when quiet returned. You changed this place. João smiled. I just said what I felt. Henrique stepped closer. May I ask a favor? Of course, sir. Don't stop speaking. Keep telling your story. The world needs to hear people like you. João scratched his neck, sheepish. You really think anyone wants to hear a mechanic talk? I think the world is tired of voices from above. It's time to hear those who speak for real. The sentence rang in João's mind. For the first time, he pictured himself speaking beyond the shop, inspiring others to start again. The judge smiled and held out his hand. Promise you'll keep inspiring people. João shook it. I promise, sir. The next day, the story swept the city. The news spread. Mechanic moves courtroom and stirs judge to tears. Social media shared the video of his speech, and thousands wrote to say they felt seen. Working men, homemakers, hopeless youth, all saw in that moment proof that honesty could still win. João didn't grasp the reach. He was busy cleaning an old shop he'd managed to rent. The makeshift sign, Hands of Faith Auto Shop, swayed in the breeze. He was sweeping when a car pulled up. The Green Beetle. Henrique stepped out smiling, an envelope in hand. I came to keep my promise. João welcomed him gladly. This car still lives? It does, but its heart is tired. Like its owner. They laughed together. João popped the hood and peered at the engine. This here's a relic, sir. It'll take work, but there's nothing we can't fix. Henrique glanced around. You know, João, when you spoke about a rusted world, it hit me. I let my own heart rust. The road pulled me away from people. João looked up. There's still time, sir. Rust wins only when we give up. Henrique smiled, leaning against the wall. I think today's the day to start polishing again. As the mechanic worked, the conversation flowed easy. They spoke of work, of faith, of how time changes us. At one point, Henrique fell quiet, watching those calloused hands move with precision, dancing across parts. I never understood why they call them dirty hands, the judge said, thoughtful. They're the hands that make the world work. João paused and smiled. Dirt washes off, sir. What must never wash away is the kindness we put in them. Henrique laughed. You should write a book. I barely write my name straight. Then speak. I'll record. Both laughed. When the engine roared back to life, the sound felt like a cymbal. Noise turned to pulse. The judge clapped like a child. Sounds brand new. João wiped his hands on a rag. No engine is beyond repair, sir. It only needs patience and will. People are the same. Enrique looked at him, moved. I needed to hear that. João stared out at the horizon and added, We're born to serve, sir. Not in a small way, but a true one. Serving is what makes us human. The judge rested a hand on his shoulder. Thank you, João. Today you reminded me of my father. What do you remember most? He said honesty is the only wealth that never runs out. João smiled. Then you're still rich, sir. They laughed. Wind tugged the shop sign. The same golden sun lit the peeling walls. Enrique slid behind the wheel and turned the key. The sound was smooth, clean. Brand new, he repeated. João waved. Not new. Renewed. The judge drove off slow, and João stood on the curb, watching the car vanish down the narrow street. He took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, life made sense. At the back of the shop, on the bench, he tucked away a wrinkled note he'd found in the judge's envelope. It read, Justice begins where respect is reborn. João folded the note and smiled. The world's engine had started again. Word traveled like wind through alleys and avenues. In a few days, the small shop became a destination. No official sign yet, just a handwritten cardboard swaying in the breeze, but people arrived as if seeking a church left open at midnight. A trucker stopped to swap a hose and left with shining eyes. A teacher brought her car for a tune-up and stayed longer than needed, sitting on a plastic chair, listening to João talk gently about simple things that never feel simple when life presses hard. He served one person at a time, slow and steady, because he knew the problem wasn't always in the engine. Sometimes it was a tired heart asking for water. By the end of the first week, the city felt different. Someone recorded a short video of João handing a car back to a young man heading to a job interview. The caption said, "Hope is also a spare part." The clip spread on its own. Comments arrived from far away, from people who'd never stepped there but said they felt embraced by the story of a man who spoke softly and repaired loudly. The City Hall page shared it with a line from Judge Henrique about respect. When João saw it, he read it silently, pocketed the phone, and tightened a metal clamp like someone sealing a pact with the world. In the second week, the shop door opened for a group of students from the neighborhood school. They came with a philosophy teacher wearing round glasses, smiling with the respect one has when entering a sacred place. He asked if João could speak 15 minutes about work, courage, and dignity. João said 15 was too long. He only knew short stories. The teacher smiled and replied that sometimes courage fits into 1 minute, the rest is silence to feel. João breathed, wiped his hands on a rag, and said what his heart had saved. The kids grew quiet, as if listening to rain falling inside. When they left, they handed him a note written by many hands. The world gets lighter when someone shows how to carry it. Judge Henrique still showed up now and then, no robe and no rush. Sometimes he brought the beetle. Sometimes he came by bus and leaned against the wall, watching João's hands move. One afternoon, he gave João a small box. Inside, a simple brushed metal plaque with 2 engraved lines, "Hands of Faith Auto Shop. We fix what time broke." João ran his fingers over the letters and laughed at his own surprise. Hanging that plaque felt like marking skin with a new beginning. It looked beautiful on the old wood, as if it had always been waiting for that moment. In the third week, the phone rang with a dreamlike invitation. The city council would hold a public hearing to discuss granting an abandoned warehouse at the end of the avenue, with the proposal to turn it into a place for free courses and a solidarity repair center. A soft-spoken councilman had pushed it forward after seeing the courtroom video. He wanted João to come, whether he liked it or not, because sometimes destiny isn't knocking, it's opening the door. João thanked him, said he wasn't sure his voice could handle it, and the judge, hearing the news, said the voice that spoke that day was alive and ready, it just needed air. The morning of the hearing smelled of rain and promises. João woke early, swept the shop, set everything in order like someone tidying a home for a dear guest, and caught the 9 o'clock bus. He wore the same pants as always because he didn't know how to dress any other kind of courage. He carried his cap in hand, like that first day, but now his head wasn't bowed, only quiet, listening to what God might say through the window's crack. At the council building, people stood on the steps, families with children, mechanics from other shops, the nurse with a small bouquet of daisies, and the philosophy teacher with his round glasses. It wasn't a loud protest. It was a patient, shared breath. Inside, the seats were full and people lined the walls. The chair of the House announced the agenda in a serene voice, explaining it was simple to say and hard to win, because they weren't discussing an idle property, but a vision of a city. Judge Henrique stood beside him, no robe, invited as a citizen, watching with the same look that guards the thread of respect. When João's name was called, the murmur faded to silence. He walked to the mic, felt his palms sweat, and thought a heart is also an engine that needs clean fuel so it won't fail when it's time to deliver. He started by saying he had no slides or numbers, he had stories. He told of a father afraid to ask for help who left without discovering help was 2 corners away. Of a young woman who came just to breathe and left with her car fixed and her gaze planted back on the road. He told of the day he heard the word respect in a courtroom and realized the right words come back to find us when we think we've got no address. He said the abandoned warehouse could shelter tired dreams, a place where every bolt had a name and every person had a seat at the table. He didn't promise miracles, he promised work. He didn't promise salvation, he promised to listen. Others spoke after him. The nurse told of the tire changed on the highway and the hurried stamp that became proof of humanity on another day. A teenager with a backpack said he knew 2-stroke engines but wanted a place to learn how to regulate his own anger. A grandmother spoke of her granddaughter who drew a sign for the future classroom with crayon and little certainty, but great will. The philosophy teacher said hope is a verb, not an adjective, and verbs need space to happen. Each word was a glowing brick. A collective building rose with no cement, held up by a rare kind of willingness the city sometimes forgets it has. The councilman who proposed it thanked them and said numbers mattered too. He spoke of youth out of school, the demand for technical training, the cars abandoned in yards for lack of a part and a person who knew how to install it without judging the mess in someone's life. He showed cost estimates and donations, explained that the municipal budget was tight, that money overflows where wool is scarce and dries up where bureaucracy is plenty. If the city breathed together, the warehouse would breathe too. The chair asked to speak for a minute and was granted it. Henrique spoke like a confession. He said he'd hidden behind codes for years and learned that day, from a mechanic, that codes only make sense when they translate people. He wasn't there to judge merit. He was there to recognize a merit the entire city had already seen. He said granting public space to a project that restores dignity isn't charity, It's a long-term investment in what keeps standing what no verdict can hold up alone. The chair adjusted the mic and asked council members to register their votes after the statements, but first offered 3 minutes of silence. An odd request in a public session. 3 minutes with no voices, just the fans were in chairs creaking as someone shifted. 3 minutes to remember the names of those who needed that space without knowing it existed. 3 minutes to think what we do with the places left over and the people left out. No one objected. Silence entered like clear water. At the end of the 3 minutes, he called the first vote. The scoreboard began timidly and soon gathered strength. One by one, the counselors said yes with a firmness that seemed to come from a childhood where people still learned to share. The next to last vote took a second longer and João's heart stalled, but the yes arrived like wind after stifling heat. The final counselor looked at the room and spoke slowly, letting each syllable find its place. The city approves the warehouse grant, with community oversight and public reports at each step. The news wasn't met with shouts. It was met with the most beautiful sound a house of laws can hold. People standing. It wasn't an explosion. It felt like the floor had springs, and bodies obeyed an ancient call. João saw entire rows rise, from the cleaning crew to the counselor with the red tie, from the boy with the backpack to the judge without a robe. There were tears, smiles, open arms, and careful hands reluctant to crowd another's space. The chair put his hand over the microphone and stayed quiet, because sometimes the wisest thing is not to compete with what life is saying on its own. João felt the same shivers in the courtroom, but warmer now, a hug filling the whole air. Someone started clapping. The rhythm came unhurried, steady, like hammer blows building the frame of a new home. The judge looked at João and nodded, smiling like a brother recognized at destiny's corner. The nurse held the daisies to her chest, then set them on the table like flowers at an altar that never had walls. The teacher lifted his glasses to wipe his eyes without smudging them. The boy with the backpack turned, smiling at his mother, and her smile carried a decade of waiting. João understood that hope doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives with people standing up, slowly. When the hall began to empty, the chair called João to his office to sign a simple paper that felt more like a handwritten letter than a document. Terms, deadlines, conditions, and a space reserved for the community council that would be born right there among people ready without knowing it. João read slowly. He signed with firm hand. His name tilted, as always, but looked more beautiful than ever. The judge signed as witness and held the paper with both hands, like something too precious to drop. Outside, the city seemed to breathe with a new chest. People greeted one another like neighbors recognizing each other again. João walked to the bus stop and stopped, realizing he didn't need to go anywhere to feel exactly where he should be. The judge caught up with him. They walked side by side, not watching their feet. They said little. The afternoon wind carried the rest. The bus came, but João didn't board. He stood there, looking at the warehouse's windows in the distance, the ones that would glow at night. The judge understood and stayed too. At dusk, João returned to the shop and switched on a warm yellow bulb that drew soft shadows on the wall. He picked up a new notebook, the teacher's gift, and wrote 3 lines that looked simple and said everything needed. Today the city listened. Today the city stood. Tomorrow the city helps sweep the warehouse floor. He closed the notebook, set it beside the metal plaque, and, for a moment, closed his eyes like someone praying. He didn't ask for anything. He gave thanks. The weeks that followed were dust and low music. Different hands carried boxes, swept, painted, sawed, and smiled. The warehouse was growing new skin. The smell of paint mingled with fresh coffee. A retired bricklayer taught two boys to set tile like writing their names on the wall of time. The nurse arranged a room with clean cloths, buckets, and simple medicines, saying caring is also part of building a shop. The teacher turned an old door into a whiteboard and wrote dignity in big letters. A student asked what dignity does when no one's looking. The teacher said it straightens the chair for the next person. On the opening day, João woke before sunrise and stared at the ceiling a while. He thought of his father, the first shop, the courtroom, the metal plaque, the judge without a robe. He wore the same pants because you don't change skin when it finally fits. He walked to the warehouse and found a world. No big stage, no band, no fireworks, no speeches in excess. People stood in a circle. The smell of fresh bread. A table of plastic cups like the best parties. The judge arrived in the Beetle and parked crooked, making everyone laugh. The nurse brought daisies again, spreading them in washed bottles. The teacher came with his round glasses and a notebook to write names that deserved to be remembered. The councilman arrived without a blazer, holding a paint roller to finish a patch of wall that kept asking for care. João asked permission and spoke briefly. He said this place had no owner, just a purpose. The shop wouldn't be only for cars. It would be for stories needing a tune-up, brake pads of patience, fresh oil of forgiveness. The school in the second room would start with the basics and follow curiosity as far as it wanted, and nobody would be more important than anyone else. If one day someone forgot why it all existed, just look at the hands. Hands always know. Judge Henrique looked around and asked for 3 minutes of silence, like that other night. He said the city now had a temple where faith was called work and miracles were called restarts. When the silence ended, applause rose again, carrying a music that needed no instruments. João knelt to fasten the new plaque to the wall. When he stood, he saw a line not coming to ask, but to offer. A hairdresser saying she could cut hair for free. A baker promising Saturday bread. An electrician pledging to fix wiring for anyone in need. A boy in a backward cap saying he could sweep well because sweeping calms the head when the world screams. By day's end, when the lights went off and the paint smell yielded to coffee's stubborn perfume, João and Henrique sat on the step. The sky was clear, the street quiet, and the heart hummed like a tuned engine. The judge said the world doesn't change with a verdict, but sometimes a verdict opens a door wide enough for hope to sit comfortably. João said the world changes when someone decides, and here, in this patch of city, many decided at once. They kept silent a while longer, because silence is where words rest after they've done their job. Before leaving, João switched on the outside light and looked at the plaque again. The letters didn't shine as they had the first night, but now they carried fingerprints, as if the city had touched them to be sure they were real. He smiled and whispered that the shop was ready. He didn't mean for cars. He meant for people. And like an old gesture learned from his mother, he ran a hand over the doorframe and wished good night to what had just been born. Then he closed up, walked down the street slowly, and felt the city close its eyes more peacefully along his path. Next morning, when the sun hit the metal plaque, someone snapped a photo without prearrangement. The image of a simple sign in an ordinary neighborhood traveled across screens and landed where people still needed a reason to get up. The comments came in a gentle wave, as if written by those at that first hearing. People saying they cried. People promising to start again. People asking forgiveness. People offering time and hands. João read a few, smiled, stopped reading, and went to open the gate. Work was waiting, and work was the language he spoke best. The sound of the first engine of the day rose like a prayer of gratitude that trades Latin for grease. And so the city learned something it sometimes forgets. A building doesn't make justice. People standing up do. And when people stand up together, even the ground understands it is worth holding the weight of this daily miracle called respect. When the sun rose that morning, the metal plaque reflected more than light. It reflected memory. Wind swept through the warehouse and made the hanging tools touch one another, a soft chiming, almost music. It felt like the building itself was breathing. João arrived before everyone, as always. He swept the floor slowly, as if brushing away the dust of an older time. Then he stood looking at the open door. Outside, the world moved. Inside, time seemed to kneel. He turned on the old coffee maker. The smell of coffee rose and mingled with grease and fresh paint. With each cup he served, he remembered someone who had passed through. The nurse now coordinating a small clinic in the neighborhood. The kid with the backpack, now an instructor for apprentices. The girl who drew the sign and now taught letters and numbers to community children. Everything was small and immense at once. One morning, Judge Henrique returned to the shop. No suit. A simple shirt and a folded newspaper under his arm. The headline read, "The mechanic and the judge who made a city stand up." The article told what everyone already knew but never tired of reading, the story of a man judged, and a judge who learned to listen. It spoke of how empathy repairs invisible engines. It ended saying the city had become a model for social reintegration projects. When João finished reading, he only shook his head. He said it wasn't a miracle. It was people. Over time, the hearing video spread, screen to screen, language to language. In a small village in Africa, a teacher used it to teach about forgiveness. In a U.S. school, students wrote letters to João, saying they wanted to be the kind of people who help others rise. In India, a woman mechanic shared the story and said, for the first time, clients started calling her by name. João knew none of this until the day the postman arrived with a package. Inside were dozens of letters in a small wooden box. In the box, an old rusty engine part with a note. So you never forget that even what looks useless can run again. He held that piece a long time, feeling the weight and the lesson it carried. Then he set it on the counter beside the coffee maker, a reminder that the world is made of fixes. The judge, for his part, began to receive invitations to speak. He declined most. He said he was still learning and preferred to talk to people in silence. He often stopped by the shop, sometimes to help, sometimes just to watch. He'd sit in a corner, listen to engines and laughter, and say that was the sound justice should have, the sound of life working again. Months after the opening, he arrived with an envelope. Inside was a photograph, the courtroom where it all began. Not empty chairs now, but dozens of law students, professors, and citizens. Above the judge's bench, a new plaque with a line engraved. Respect is the first sentence of every justice. Henrique explained the phrase passed unanimously. João smiled and said his name didn't need to be under it. The judge replied that his name was already engraved where it mattered, in the people who stood that day. Time passed and the project grew. The shop became a school. The school became a gathering place. Saturdays meant a shared lunch in the yard. Musicians, bricklayers, seamstresses, and homemakers came to trade stories. A blind man played the accordion. A 10-year-old read poems about starting over. No one commanded anyone. Each did what they could, and it was enough. One afternoon a reporter asked João the secret to such success. He said the secret was not chasing success. He chased quiet, and the rest followed. When pressed about what kept him going, João replied, "The sound of an engine is just the soul's echo, trying to keep moving." The line made headlines and inspired documentaries, songs, and social projects. But João never got used to being news. He kept sweeping the floor, opening before dawn, closing after the last car left. On a cold night, the judge found him sitting on the curb, gazing at the warehouse lights. João said he sometimes still dreamed of that first day in court, the chill of the floor, the weight of their stares. The judge said he dreamed too, but now, in the dream, the chairs never stayed empty again. He dreamed of people standing. Always. Silence settled between them, comfortable, easy. The moon was high, the wind made the leaves dance. The judge broke the silence to say he would leave the bench at year's end. He would devote himself to training new judges. He wanted to teach that the robe is just cloth, and true judgment is done with the heart. João smiled and said that meant he'd finally be a mechanic too, repairing jammed souls. In time, other cities copied the Hands of Faith model. A warehouse in Minas. Another in Mexico. One in Mozambique. All with the same motto, fix what time broke. And near the entrance of each, a black and white photo of João and Henrique side by side. One day, a letter arrived stamped from far away. It came from a young man serving time on a rural farm prison. He wrote that the story of the mechanic and the judge made him want to study. He wanted to get out and open a shop called Second Gear. João read it in silence for a long time. Then he wrote back, "Every gear is second, son. First is just to get moving." Seasons turned. João's hair silvered, but the spark in his eyes stayed. The judge, retired, still visited. He spent afternoons helping with papers and told old cases to boys eager to learn. They called him Doc, and he laughed, saying his diploma now was a wrench. One late afternoon, over their last coffee, the judge asked if João still believed in miracles. He said yes, but he'd learned to call them well-worked coincidences. Then he looked at his dirty hands and added, "Maybe the greater miracle is when we don't give up cleaning the part, even when we think it will never spin again." The judge nodded, moved. He said it would be his last visit before moving closer to his daughter. João said nothing, just held his hand long enough to fit all the words that didn't need saying. When the judge left, João watched the blue beetle disappear around the bend. Gratitude and melancholy mingled. Then he went back to work. Night fell, and the shop stayed lit, like a beacon. Months later, a letter came signed by the judge's daughter. She wrote that her father had passed peacefully, with a smile, and that on his nightstand lay a photograph of the shop and a note. "True justice is fixing what pride broke." João read it, breathed deep, and looked at the ceiling. Tears came soft as gentle rain on a familiar roof. Next morning, he gathered the apprentices and told them the news. Then he hung the photograph on the wall beside the metal plaque. He stood there a while and said only. He stood up again. The shop kept living. New people arrived. Old ones returned. Every tightened bolt, every tuned engine, every shared smile carried a piece of the story that began in a courtroom and became a chain of faith around the world. Years later, a documentary about João aired in many languages. It showed images of the shop, of youth learning, of calloused hands holding tools. The final shot was simple, João sweeping at dusk while a voice narrated. As long as there is a hand dirty with grease, there is still hope in the world's engine. The screen went black, but the sound remained, the soft purr of a perfectly running motor, like humanity's heart beating once more. And that's how the world understood, respect can start with a look, but it becomes eternal only when it makes people rise together.